need to reason. Will you open your eyes? It's a wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah. Gotta get away from this illusion. For the sake of the world, this delusion. It's gotta go. Yeah.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Russell Glaser, and with me today is my co-host, Tracie Harris,
Hey.
who throws a heck of a party.
Thank you.
Today is Sunday, December 18th, 2011. We are a live call-in public access atheist television show based in Austin, Texas, dedicated to promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We're available through live streaming at ustream.tv. The official Atheist Experience website is atheist-experience.com. The Atheist Experience is sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit organization which you can find at www.atheist-community.org. You can also provide feedback by commenting on the official show blog. That's at freethoughtblogs.com/AXP. Or you can also email us at tv@atheist-community.org. Be sure to check out our other regular shows, The Nonprofits and Godless Bitches, two audio-only podcasts catering to the diverse niches of the atheist community and available through the ACA website. If you enjoy the show today, please come and join us for dinner afterwards, beginning at around 6 at El Arroyo, 1624 West 5th Street in Austin. How are you?
Good, thanks.
I'd like to take a minute before the show to say a few words about Christopher Hitchens, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. So Christopher Hitchens died on Thursday at the age of 62. He was the author of God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, and an outspoken atheist debater. He was a well-respected figure in the international atheist community. Of all the things that people have written about him in the last few days, I think that the most fitting tribute to him was a headline in the satirical newspaper The Onion. There was no article, just a headline that said, "Fumbling inarticulate obituary writer somehow losing debate to Christopher Hitchens." When I watch people debate atheism, I'm often left frustrated by their approach, and sometimes I feel like they've tried too hard to be nice, or they didn't hammer home a point that ought to have been made. Among the debates that I've seen, I've always felt like Christopher Hitchens was the least frustrating and most confident speaker that I've ever had the privilege of watching. Hitchens lived with esophageal cancer for the last 2 years, and as such he had the luxury, or actually the burden, of knowing more or less when he was going to die. In April, Christopher Hitchens was not able to attend the American Atheist Convention, so instead he sent them a long letter, which many people saw as his own self-eulogy. So I think it's fitting that we should read it now. It says, "Dear fellow unbelievers, nothing would have kept me from joining you except for the loss of my voice, at least my speaking voice, which is in turn due to a long argument that I am currently having with the specter of death. Nobody ever wins this argument, though there are some solid points to be made while the discussion goes on. I have found, as the enemy becomes more familiar, that all the special pleading for salvation, redemption, and supernatural deliverance appears even more hollow and artificial to me than it did before. I hope to help defend and pass on the lessons of this for many years to come. But for now, I have found my trust better placed in two things: the skill and principle of advanced medical science and the comradeship of innumerable friends and family, all of them immune to the false consolations of religion. It is these forces, among others, which will speed the day when humanity emancipates itself from the mind-forged manacles of servility and superstition. It is our innate solidarity and not some despotism of the sky which is the source of our morality and our sense of decency. That essential sense of decency is outraged every day. Our theocratic enemy is in plain view. Protean in form, it extends from the overt menace of nuclear-armed mullahs to the insidious campaigns to have stultifying pseudoscience taught in American schools. But in the past few years, there have been heartening signs of a genuine and spontaneous resistance to this sinister nonsense. A resistance which repudiates the rights of bullies and tyrants to make the absurd claim that they have God on their side. To have had a small part in this resistance has been the greatest honor of my lifetime. The pattern and original of all dictatorship is the surrender of reason to absolutism and the abandonment of critical objective inquiry. The cheap name for this lethal delusion is religion, and we must learn new ways of combating it in the public sphere, just as we have learned to free ourselves of it in private. Our weapons are the ironic mind against the literal, the open mind against the credulous, the courageous pursuit of truth against the fearful and abject forces who would set limits to investigation and who stupidly claim that we already have all the truth we need. Perhaps above all, we affirm life over the cults of death and human sacrifice, and are afraid not of inevitable death, but rather of a human life that is cramped and distorted by the pathetic need to offer mindless adulation, or the dismal belief that the laws of nature respond to wailings and incantations. As the heirs of a secular revolution, American atheists have a special responsibility to defend and uphold the Constitution that patrols the boundary between church and state. That, too, is an honor and a privilege. Believe me when I say that I am present with you, even if not corporeally and only metaphorically in spirit, resolved to build up Mr. Jefferson's wall of separation, and don't keep the faith. Sincerely, Christopher Hitchens. Now, at the same time that I express my admiration of Christopher Hitchens, I don't want to whitewash the fact that he was a controversial figure, even among atheists. He was a strong advocate of the Iraq War, which many of us opposed. And in 2007, he denounced the attendees at a meeting of the Freedom from Religion Foundation as being soft on Islam and being too weak to commit to an all-out clash of civilizations. And he strongly recommended that we go on to declare war against Iran. He called one questioner incredibly stupid for not understanding that every Muslim killed is a Muslim we don't have to fight, as P.Z. Myers reported. I'm bringing this up not because I want to denounce Hitchens, but I want to point out that he was a complex individual with strong convictions who never hesitated to piss off any person or group he spoke to. He was, however, also very open to changing his mind. He was initially a supporter of waterboarding as an interrogation technique, but in 2008 he set out to prove that it wasn't torture, and so he submitted to being put through the process by a group of military veterans. The follow-up article he wrote in Vanity Fair was titled simply, "Believe Me, It's Torture." One of the accusations we get all the time when we speak out as atheists is that atheism is just another religion. Instead of God, we worship money or science or ourselves, and our religious figures are people like Richard Dawkins or Charles Darwin or Christopher Hitchens. And I think it's important to remember that the atheist movement doesn't have any idols, only people who earn our respect based on the quality of their ideas. And I appreciated Christopher Hitchens for who he was. I think he would have sneered at the idea of being idolized, but we will miss him. He's not in heaven and he's not in hell, and all that remains of us is in our memories now. But anyway, Christopher Hitchens was one of the lucky ones. This is the last atheist experience of before the year 2012, and we know that really, truly, the world is ending this time in a blaze of Roland Emmerich-style special effects. But Hitch, here's to you. All right, have we got calls?
We've got calls.
Okay. Mark in Ontario, California.
Oh, there you go, Mark. You're on.
Yeah, hi. I'm Mark. I'm a devout Christian. Haven't been all my life. I'm born again. I led a life of crime and everything else, and I was born again when I was at treatment center. This isn't the point I'm trying to make. I'm not getting into that, but I've heard you say a number of times you've looked at it and you can't find a reason to believe. I just wanted to touch on this a bit. Myself, I found a reason to believe because when I gave my life to Christ, my life changed, and I stopped committing crime, and I stopped doing drugs, and everything just started working out for me. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm simplifying it, and I'm saying, if you don't believe in a God, where did everything come from? Because it's just as ludicrous to believe that the Big Bang just happened, and everything just laid out, and the universe is just the way it is. I mean, cities don't just pop up out of the ground because two rocks bang together. There's geniuses that plan the construction of buildings. So how much more complicated is the universe?
Crazy. I've been talking for like 10 minutes, so...
Where do you believe everything came from, Mark?
I believe that there's some all-powerful being. Maybe the Big Bang is the what he used. I believe there's some all-powerful being that chain reacted to Big Bang, just like when we bring down buildings for precise explosions, that made it happen, and everything is the way it is because of this all-powerful being.
Why do you believe that?
Because I feel his presence within me. Like I said, I used to be a criminal. I used to be a drug user. I used to be all these bad things, and as soon as I let that being into my life, I was able to live a new life.
Well, you do understand that people can change their lives for all manner of reasons, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so some people do change their lives and they attribute it to religion, and some people change their lives and they're not religious, correct?
I'm not saying, yeah, I know that. I know.
I'm just asking.
Like
I'm just making sure we're on the same page. So you changed your life and you attribute it to religion. So why do you attribute it to religion?
Not so much religion, spirituality.
Okay, why do you attribute it to spirituality?
Because I believe that there's more than what we see. Just like in the ocean, the tip of the iceberg is only what you see on the surface, and there's so much more underneath.
Why do you believe that?
Because it just makes sense to me. It just feels right. It's
So
like,
you feel it's correct, but what do you know why you feel it's correct?
I don't know. It's like one of those things you can't explain. Like you can't tell somebody why you love somebody. You just know in your heart that you do.
But can people be mistaken about the things that they know in their heart? Can a person know in their heart that their spouse is faithful and then find out they've actually been cheating?
Yeah.
Okay, so
like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying some of the things that happen in the name of religion, like 9/11 and things like that. I totally disagree with that, and I think that's totally wrong.
right. I agree. But I guess what I'm asking is, you said you know this because you feel it in your heart, but we agree that sometimes people feel things in their heart and it's the intuition is not right. So how do you know that what you feel is correct?
Honestly, it's not something that I can explain or put into words. It's like to quote a famous movie, and I just say to quote it, so I'm not stealing it.
No, I understand.
Like Morpheus says to Neo, I can't explain what the Matrix is to you. It's something you have to experience for yourself.
Right, but I mean, Morpheus didn't just rely on saying you have to have faith in it. He actually demonstrated that the Matrix happened, right? I mean, you know, and unless he had provided that evidence, then he could very well have been just a crazy guy.
Yeah, it's like, would Neo have believed it without the pill?
Yeah, I mean, if Morpheus came up to me right now and and told me actually the Matrix is real and the movie was a documentary, I wouldn't believe him, would you?
No. Okay, the evidence for me was, like I said, I spent numbers of years in and out of jail. And what the turning point for me was, I'd seen numbers of people who I knew were hardened criminals, the toughest, roughest people you'd ever met or ever knew. So it wasn't just reading a book, it was people I knew personally.
So we can agree that
they're like the Christ, they became a totally new person,
Okay, so we can agree that when people adopt certain beliefs, then often that changes their lives because they act differently according to those beliefs. But does that mean that the beliefs are true? I mean, if I developed a serious belief in Islam and I stopped being a criminal as a result of that belief, you wouldn't think that Islam is true, would you?
That's a good point. That's a good point. You have a good point. My brother Rick is actually the one that turned me on to the atheist experience, and he did warn me that you guys would have some stifling questions and points.
I'm not trying to stifle you. I mean, I just think, you called in and you'd like to convince us that your point of view is right.
Or at least explain it so that, you just called in to talk to us about what you believe and why you believe it. And so that's fine. I mean, I understand what you believe and I understand what's driving that belief. I just question whether that is valid. Because I do know that what people feel sometimes is incorrect. It's incorrectly interpreted. Of course, you feel what you feel, but the cause of that feeling sometimes isn't what you think it is. And sometimes, like what I was talking about with infidelity, a person can feel in their heart that my spouse would never cheat on me, my spouse is faithful to me, and they believe that. But then they find out that their spouse has been cheating and having an affair for the last year. And this happens. So feelings can, even though the person felt honestly that their spouse was being faithful, and that was true of them to say that that's how they felt and that they had confidence in that, sometimes that's not really, the confidence is misplaced. Or the reason for the confidence isn't that the interpretation of the event is correct, or the interpretation of the feeling.
Okay. So what are your guys' thoughts and feelings and beliefs on the spiritual side of humanity and being human?
I ask people when they call in to tell me how they define spiritual because I don't know what the word means.
Yeah, you're right. That is a very vague, because I don't mean like religious. I mean like just knowing that there's more to us than just flesh, blood, and bone. Like,
do you know that?
Well, what about the 7 ounces? I think it is.
The
6
what?
Ounces, 7 ounces.
You're talking about
read articles
like some number of
people
grams disappear, or the human body loses a certain number of grams when they die, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because actually somebody just wrote to me about this last week, and I actually went up and looked this thing up on Snopes, and apparently, I mean, this is a real experiment that somebody tried like 100 or 200 years ago or so. But people, people who have come in after him and looked at how he did the study and compared it, like done it with proper experimental controls, found out that there were things that he was doing wrong, which accounted for the lost weight. I think that I can't remember exactly what it is, but
but you said you found it on Snopes, right?
Yeah.
So he can look this
Snopes
up.
Look up. I think it's 21 grams, isn't it? I think it's something like that. But I mean, it was something like the bodies that he was studying. There were a small number of them, and they were all stored in cold conditions, which bodies generally are, and they lost moisture that way. And then he compared it to doing a study on dogs under the principle that dogs don't have a soul, but then the dogs weren't stored in the same way as the people. So, I mean, It's interesting that, this sounds very convincing because it's in kind of a scientific framework. But if you're going to make a scientific-style argument that there's a soul, then you have to be willing to accept the kind of scientific criticism which is routine.
Well, but I would also add, if this spirit is physical, which it would have to be in order to account for actual measurable weight, then it should be identifiable physically, shouldn't it?
Well, because I'm a born-again Christian, I'm not like an atypical Christian who denies, like, certain facts. Like, I totally know the world has been in existence for 4 billion years, not just 6,000 years.
Well, no, I guess what I'm trying to, excuse me, what I'm trying to ask is, if a person did lose weight after they died, wouldn't that indicate that whatever was lost was physical? Because physical mass has weight, correct?
Yeah.
So in that case, the person would be describing the soul as a physical thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so is that spiritual or is that a physical thing? And if there's a loss of physical mass, shouldn't then, if that's a soul, shouldn't it be physically identifiable while we're alive? Like, shouldn't we be able to physically identify the soul as a part of the body if it has physical mass?
Yeah, that's okay. That's a good strong point.
I guess when we ask what are the reasons you believe, going at it from a scientific point of view is kind of a good thing to do, and it's not because science is something we automatically trust, or science is our religion, like I was saying earlier. That's not the case. It's just that science is kind of an attempt by humans to sort of admit that we are all fallible, and that, like Tracie was saying, the things that we believe, even if we really, really believe them, aren't always true. And so, we ask ourselves the question, I know I'm capable of error, so how would I go about finding out for sure, coming up with some kind of verification? And the idea of going after, of measuring a soul, or even thinking of a test to measure a soul is a good start. But, you have to follow all the principles that make sure that your test is really objective and not just steering you toward what you want to think is true. You see what I'm saying?
And you'd also have to have a pretty good definition for a soul to know what it was exactly that you were looking for. Yeah,
true. Okay. Okay, just one more thing, because we're talking about scientists and stuff here. Like, I just wanted to mention this too. C.S. Lewis, I'm sure you know who that is, right?
Sure.
Yes.
He set out, he was a scientific mind, a great scientific mind from his time. He set out
he wasn't a scientist,
to disprove the existence of God, and in his trek to disprove the existence of God, he ended up becoming one of Christianity's greatest supporters.
How?
Can you explain
what
this
was
phenomenon?
the evidence? What was the evidence that changed his mind? I know that C.S. Lewis, I really enjoy his fiction. The things he considers nonfiction, not so much. But if he was this great scientific mind, then what was the evidence, as far as you know, that made him a Christian?
Well, from what I understand, the Alpha series, I don't know if you know anything, if you know about the Alpha series and Nicky Gumbel, the Alpha series. He quotes C.S. Lewis a lot. From what I understand, in his trek to disprove God, he found that there is a vague emptiness and that there is no purpose or meaning to our existence without the existence of God.
Okay,
So
wait a minute. Wait a minute.
What?
Do you know that there are many, many Buddhists that don't believe in God?
No.
Okay, Buddhism does not rely on belief in a God. There is no God in Buddhism. And I'm pretty sure they have a very directed purpose and meaning to what they do. I mean, they have a specific philosophy that guides their life, but they don't have a God. So I don't agree that a person requires a God in order to have meaning and purpose. I mean, Buddhists are one example. I think anyone can do it, but they're a good example of a more structured group with a more defined belief system that doesn't incorporate a God. And humanists would be another kind of conglomerated group that has sort of like a directive to do what is best for humanity and I guess like the planet in general and things like that. So there are people who have purposes that are direct purposes for helping the planet or helping people or doing the right thing while they're alive, and not so focused, I guess, on the idea of God or appeasing a God. You also have deists who believe in a God but think that that God is not interacting with people at all and has no concern for us whatsoever. And those people believe in a God, but that God has nothing to do with any sort of meaning in their lives or directing their lives in any way.
Okay.
I really I appreciate the honest attitude in your call. I just want to tell you that.
And I mean, I think maybe you ought to, think about it a little more and maybe call back another week. Would that be okay with you?
Like I said, I'm open-minded. Like, that was part of how I changed my life, too. I had to become open-minded, open to new concepts and ideas and ways of thinking, so.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Right.
Well, thanks. You've given me a lot to think about.
Well, thank you for your call.
Yeah, thanks. I hope you call back.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later. We have next Adam in Louisiana. Adam?
Hi, Russell. Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
Hi, Adam.
First-time caller. Tracy,
Hello.
you're looking beautiful as always.
Thank you.
First, I wanted to comment on what the previous caller had said, and I get this a lot with a lot of Christian friends and everything. They'll look at the beauty in nature, and they'll attribute that to God.
Right.
For instance, you go outside and you have the sun that gives you warmth, or the trees will give you oxygen, or you may have, you look at the aesthetics of going to the beach or whatnot. But the issue is that often people are only looking at one side of the glass, I would think, and that they never attribute any of the bad stuff to the same benevolent God,
Right.
such as hurricanes, pandemics, famines, things like that.
Right. Well, I mean, it's called selection bias.
Yes.
And I don't want to be too bad about beating up the world because I happen to like it. But
I would say, in my opinion, I have an incident that's foremost in my mind on this comment, but I'm not going to mention it because it's pretty fresh, and I don't want to say anything negative regarding the family who is hurting right now. But a lot of times what you see is when there's a horrible tragedy, people will see the victim of that tragedy. Let's say something horrible happens to somebody and they survive it, and then the family will say things like, they survived, it's a miracle, God was looking out for them. And you think, do you understand what just happened to this person? It would have been better if God were looking out for them before this horrible event that altered their life forever, instead of keeping them alive after they've been, horribly damaged. And so, yes, there is this attitude that it's like, God is looking out for them. And I don't think they see the irony in having somebody looking out for you who allows you to be physically or mentally damaged in the worst possible way, and that you didn't die from it, and somehow that's good babysitting.
Yeah, to be in the clergy, you have to be a great rhetorician to be able to, convince people that the benevolent ruler is looking out for you. And also, a lot of times you also get, I've heard before, you get a lot of callers who will say, yes, if you don't believe in the Creator, you will go to hell, or when you die, you will simply not exist. And my whole contradiction to that is, I've had a lot of relatives pass on, close family members who are firm believers in Christianity. And if these people have passed on are in heaven, and they really love me, and they're in this perfect utopian afterlife, they would be suffering too if their loved ones were not with them. So the whole idea that apostasy leads to damnation contradicts itself to me.
well, they'll just say that it doesn't work like that, and and they can't come drop in on you and tell you the truth, and and I think they even say that when you're in heaven, you become perfect enough that you won't mind so much that evil gets punished. So. I'm just saying there are always excuses. They're not good excuses, but they're out there.
Yes, I understand clearly. And finally, I wanted to touch on, I recently had a conversation with my father, and he was telling me that your outlook on God changes when you're in the hospital bed. Your mindset changes when you're in a life-threatening predicament.
Christopher Hitchens didn't.
That in his movie, Place in a Foxhole. we have a tendency to grasp onto something. Even sometimes I'm subject to the whole idea. It's kind of like that 90s sci-fi movie Cube, the premise about the 6 people trapped in the cube, and they never explain how they got there or who's controlling the whole mechanism. But it's kind of like, I guess, sitting out an SOS on the other side of the wall, saying, if there is somebody listening, help me out. And I guess just your take on the whole demeanor changing when you're in a precarious position like that, if you're in the hospital bed.
You didn't hear me. Christopher Hitchens didn't do that.
Yeah, he just,
ahead, Russell.
earlier Russell had read a letter from Christopher Hitchens where he talked about how facing death just made all of that turning to God seem even less important and more hollow. And also the way that's normally phrased, what you're describing is that statement, there's no atheists in a foxhole. Have you ever heard that? It's the same idea. And we have 2 veterans that are hosts of the program. So, clearly there are atheists in foxholes, although I guess Matt was a believer while he was in the military, and then it wasn't until after.
And I mean, there's also the Military Alliance of Atheists.
Yeah, so I mean, the idea that facing death or being in a situation like that is going to make somebody change, I also know someone who, I've known a couple people actually who have gone through illnesses that were terminal or close to terminal, and and both these people, neither of them changed their attitudes at all. One went down basically saying, I've lived my life exactly as I wanted to, and I'm very happy with it, and it looks like I'm going to die when I'm 50 years old, and that's the way it goes.
You know what it is? It's a comforting fairy tale that religious people tell themselves because when they can't make any headway in an actual argument convincing the atheist, then they'll get to at least feel smug and say, oh, well,
one day,
when that guy is on his deathbed or facing down bullets, he'll suddenly realize that I'm right. Yeah. And so I really won. Won't that be great?
And I'll say the human psyche has its limitations, and that's another thing with it.
Yeah.
But appreciate the time. You guys have a great New Year.
Sure. Thank you. You too.
Thanks for calling. So we have next George in Costa Rica. George?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Hello.
First of all, very saddened about Christopher. He was like a personal hero of mine. Anyway, moving on. I don't know if you guys have ever spoken about this, but I have one kid. He's 6 years old. Here in Costa Rica, we don't have a separation of church and state. We do live in a country that recognizes Catholicism as its basically a religion, and we basically have to follow that. Anyway, we as atheist parents, and most me personally, would like to basically hear your thoughts on if we should tell kids that there is no God, or if just wait and see what happens, or what your thoughts were on that issue.
George, I've written a couple of blog posts that you should probably like to look up. On freethoughtblogs.com/AXP, I wrote 2 posts that were titled Raising Atheists, which address that kind of question. And basically, the short version, and if you can't find it with Google, then just shoot an email to tv@atheist-community.org, and I'll link you to it. But the short version is, I'm a big fan in being as honest as possible with your kids. I think that a lot of atheist parents are too hesitant to honestly tell their kids what they think. And so I wouldn't whitewash either the facts as you see them or the controversy that's likely to cause. I would say, look, here's the Bible, here's what it says. I believe in not believing stuff without good evidence. You're going to have to decide stuff for yourself, but here's what I think and here's why. And you're going to have a lot of influence over your kid just because you are with him a lot. you're his parent, you're the primary figure in his life, but he's also going to get a lot of outside peer pressure. So, my policy is make sure your kid knows as much as possible, and if he has to go to church or or wants to go to church with his friends, because churches make things fun for kids, don't.
It's like the Happy Meal toy.
Right. Don't try to hide them from it, but make sure that they're equipped to understand why you think what you do.
Yes. No, of course, the thing is, we've had kind of a demonizing view of atheists in this country. So it's absolutely a taboo subject. Nobody ever talks about that. I mean, everybody would rather be labeled as gay or something like that than being labeled as atheist.
And in a lot of cases that's true here too, but it's hard work standing up for reality in every generation. Just ask Galileo.
Yes.
I think it's more important to teach your child how to think. I do agree with Russell that there's nothing wrong with telling him what you think, but I also think that it makes me a little nervous when people become lackadaisical about how powerful religion is and the influence that it has. And sometimes if a person is not equipped, or a child or even an adult is not equipped to deal with claims and question claims and think critically about those claims, it's really easy to get confused when you get confronted by a person who knows a lot about religion. You don't know much about it. They start telling you things you've never heard this before. You don't know what they're talking about. They're going on about prophecies. And you're hearing them making all these claims, and it can become very confusing. And when someone is young and impressionable, it can sound very much like this person has a lot of information. They seem really smart, really, really well read. They seem to know a lot about religion, and I've never heard anything about it, and I haven't really thought about it. And they can really get sucked into that if they don't know how to be critical of a claim.
Right. I think kids should be skeptics first and atheists distant second.
Yes, actually, that's why I'm reading the Bible right now.
Good for you.
Yeah, well, basically the idea is to, come across these passages and take a good look at them so that we are like in the same page when we ever talk about it.
Read it to your kids. Introduce it right along with Harry Potter and all the other mythology.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I most likely will. The other thing is, I do watch a lot of videos on YouTube, and it seems kind of odd that most of the atheist view get a bunch of likes, and the opposite view or religious view usually end up having a lot of dislikes. Is that like a trend that you have seen, or how could you explain that in a mostly religious world?
Can I just offer something, and you can tell me if this is what you think too? I think that what happens is that religion has the benefit of being very social in groups everywhere. Like whatever religion you are, you can almost find like a group somewhere if you're like part of a major religious cult or sect. And so you go into a community, there's a Baptist community, you hang out with your Baptist friends at their Baptist church, and you have that right there. Or like you're talking about in your country, it would be Catholicism, so the Catholics have their communities right there. I think a lot of atheists don't have communities. They don't have somewhere where they can go in their area and meet with other atheists or talk to other atheists or be with anybody where they can even sometimes open their mouth without being attacked or questioned or completely, just put under a third degree.
Oh, yeah, because you never get attacked or questioned on the internet, right?
Well, but what I'm saying is, when they go online, what happens is they find community online. It's easy to connect with other atheists online. It's very hard sometimes for people to do that in their communities where they live. As you're describing, it's very difficult to find somebody that's not a member of the Catholic Church. So it becomes a place where atheists have found, wow, I can go here and I can have community here. And I think there's a lot of atheists that use the internet as a community.
It's almost really like the internet is an inversion of the real world when it comes to religious popularity. I mean, one data point I'd throw at you, for instance, is that on Reddit, which is a site where people, share links and talk with each other about anything they find anywhere, there's an atheism group which is like, I can't remember, it's somewhere around 10 or 100 times bigger than the Christianity group. And when people post in the Christianity group, they get piled on by atheists asking for evidence, which is kind of the opposite situation in the real world, where Christians, by virtue of bigger actual numbers, manage to sort of stifle and discourage dissent because atheists wind up being so isolated. I guess part of it is that even though most people are religious, all the religions disagree with each other. So it's quite possible that Christians are all just downvoting each other because it's not the right religious group.
That's a good point I hadn't thought of.
But also, cults in particular rely on stifling the dissenting information, of being the only information source that you can possibly get. And atheism is the opposite, and I think that's why it thrives on a medium like the internet, where anybody can hear anything from anywhere.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Well, maybe one last thing.
Make it quick.
Yes. I was looking at a TV program the other day that basically was kind of explaining the Christian end of the world story when the devil comes down and all this. And if that were like the grand plan, and this and this and this had to happen for this end of the world, I mean, I guess the devil would know that he will be defeated at the end. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for him to go out of his way and make it happen, because it would be like suicide for him. How do Christians explain that dumb attitudes for the devil?
You should ask a Christian.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it just seems like the devil just never gives up. He's never going to admit defeat.
And, there's not like one consensus about what's going to happen in the end times or how the devil is going to act, because everybody just kind of makes up their own story and then superimposes it over the very odd language in the Bible and just throw in whatever verses they can to justify that God's on their side.
Yeah, when you get to Revelation, you'll see how it works.
Yeah, why don't you start with Revelation while you're reading the Bible? It's a bunch of BS.
I might. Well, thank you very much, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Same to you.
Okay, bye.
No Merry Christmas? Why do you hate America? John in Des Moines, Iowa.
Well, hi, Russell and Tracie.
Hello.
I appreciated your comments earlier about Hitchens and that letter that
thank you.
that he wrote. And I think it's kind of a little bit apropos to what I'm curious about. I come from a family that over the last 30 years or so has become predominantly atheist, but we still have a discussion amongst ourselves about, well, through this process, many of the members of my family, and I'm talking about my parents and sisters, siblings and whatnot, they went to the Unitarian Church, left the Methodist Church, and my thinking is, this is just kind of a feather bed for people that have lost their faith. Still something for them to find a sense of community and express their values and whatnot. But kind of my main issue that I'm going through and trying to think through myself is, I think I see a lot of these liberal religions kind of sprouting up. You've heard of Bishop Spong, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm kind of familiar with him. He's, remind me what he does again?
Well, I'm not an expert on what he's saying, but his theology is so secular that I don't even see how you can call it a Christian anymore. It's just, and that's kind of my whole issue is some of these religions, the Unitarian Church and others, have become so liberal and so secular that they're completely different from anything that has ever been said in the Bible. And kind of one issue is why even call them religions anymore. But I think my bigger issue is I choose not to support, say, the Unitarian Church or these other liberal religions, because I think doing so, even though I agree with most of everything that they promote, I think doing so still supports the larger institution of religion. And I would rather see, the end of faith altogether, and a civilization that is based much more on science and reason and critical thinking. And even though these liberal religions are, probably a lot more correct than the fundamentalist religions, I think ultimately they end up propping up the entire institution. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, John, I have thoughts on that. You're talking about Unitarian Universalists, is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. I mean, I've been to their churches before, and my experience is that you went in and there was like social function, and then you had like what amounted to a lecture. It really wasn't a sermon or anything promoting religion. It was like almost going in and hearing a lecture about religion, like you would experience at a university if you were taking a religion class.
That's pretty accurate.
Yeah, and I think what's happening is you are looking at what they're doing, and you're looking at it with your goal. And you're saying that, overall, we have all this damage that religion wreaks, and so it would be a good thing if this were gone. The
Right.
UU Church really isn't, that's not where their head is at. They're looking at this and they're just saying, we like the community and stuff, but we're not, this is my feeling after having, been there. It's about socializing, and like you said, it's providing a churchish atmosphere that people are used to make a social group that is hands-off as far as religion. So they don't really have a position that I could tell on religion. It just seemed to be whatever you think sitting in the pew, if you believe in God, if you don't believe in God, we don't care. And it's just, we're all coming together and we're just going to be this community, and it's like religious objectivity, I guess. Like, we're not going to make any position, they're not going to condemn any of it. And so they're kind of looking at it as like replacing, I guess, a doctrinal sort of religion with just making it a social thing, and you believe whatever you want, but we're just going to teach facts from the pulpit and give lectures from the pulpit, like community informational things, and we'll have community bulletin boards, and you can take part in these community functions if you want. We're having a potluck next Saturday, and that's just kind of what they did. And so I think they're just sort of looking at it as like, can't we just have this community function and not worry about this doctrinal stuff and just have our little group? And you're right, calling it a church is a little weird, but it's sort of a church format, I guess, like the way it's set up. But it's not a church in any sense of the like teaching or indoctrinating sense. As far as what you're saying, does it foster and cater to liberal religion? Yes, I think it absolutely does. Now, is that a problem? Well, they're not looking at it like you're looking at it. The way you're looking at it, yes, that's a problem, because that liberal religion buffers criticism of more fundamental religions and more extreme religions. And so it does cause a bit of a problem, especially if the liberal group is standing up to buffer criticism like openly. If they're saying like you shouldn't criticize people for their beliefs, if this is what they're teaching, they really are teaching something that keeps you from being able to hammer the more dangerous sects of religion that need hammering. So I do think they can be a problem And I understand the problem you're describing, and I've written about it as well, and I agree that the liberal branches of religion do buffer extreme religions, and they also prop it up because the problems with the more extreme religions are that they believe in an authoritarian deity that is telling them to do these things, and what's happening is when you have a liberal believer, they believe in that deity, but they believe it tells you to do different things. And so when they're both operating on faith, there is no mechanism for one to demonstrate the other is wrong. So they're saying basically, I have faith that my God is telling me to do these nice things, and this other guy is over here saying, I have faith that my God is telling me these horrible things, and I don't see how I can criticize the guy whose God is telling him to do horrible things when the person over here is telling me that it's perfectly fine to believe in this God, to believe in this God's authority, and to do whatever he says. But I just believe he says to do good things. Well, how do I criticize the guy who's saying he believes it's evil things? You can't tell me how you know that God has told you to do anything. You just have faith. So yes, it does buffer it, and it creates a big problem. I agree.
Yeah, well, you really, I think you really nailed the UU Church in your overview there, and I think that it just religions evolve in order to survive. And if they didn't evolve, if we still had the Christianity of even just go back 100 years ago, I think its numbers in church attendance would be extremely low. It would just die out.
Yeah.
And especially in the U.S., I see it evolving a lot more. There's more of a smorgasbord of religions to choose from, as compared to let's say Europe. Where from what I see, religion seems to be on the decline, and because we have such so many choices here in the United States.
That's the way they see it too, and they hate it. We're getting close to the end of the show though, so I'd like to be able to squeeze in one more caller. But thanks for calling.
Yeah, thanks. It was good talking to you, John.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
Possibly our last caller. We got like 7 minutes left or so, is John in Virginia. John?
Yes, sir.
How are you?
I'm doing good today. How are you guys?
Good.
Great.
Have you guys heard about the double-slit experiment and Schrodinger's cat?
Quantum mechanics? Yeah. They're not directly related to each other, but yeah.
Okay. Well, let me argue to it this way. If electrons and these subatomic particles are in a wave-like state, and the double-slit experiment proves that the wave function is collapsed when we observe where the electrons are at, then could that perhaps prove that there is a God, because the ultimate observer tells you, me, her, and everybody where the chair is or where the clock is when they're all in a state of flux, in a quantum state of flux?
What makes you think that quantum mechanics implies that there has to be an observer all the time? I mean, I think the whole point of quantum mechanics is that without an observer, there is no actual answer to which slit the electron went in. And it would certainly be pointless to say that if there was no such thing as a state where there was no observer, right?
Yeah, you have a point, but I mean, if all these atoms are made up of these particles that are in a wave-like state, you see, then what tells us where the chair is, or
when we observe
why do you agree and I agree and she agree, and why do all these people agree unless there's an ultimate observer showing us and saying where the chair is?
I think you need to study up on quantum mechanics some more, because there's no concept of an ultimate observer implied by anything that is said in there.
I mean, or else you could, if you could find actually the experiment published anywhere, you could read the conclusions and see what conclusions they drew from the experiment and see if they mention anything about that.
I'm sure they don't, but...
Why do you think they wouldn't?
I have no clue. I guess I haven't looked into it further.
I mean, if it implies that, don't you think they would note that in their conclusions?
I just maybe think it might be people not wanting to take a look at that viewpoint.
So you think it's a massive conspiracy that everybody who studies quantum mechanics somehow manages to cover up the fact that they really think it might be about a God observing things, but not a single scientist is religious enough to go with that conclusion and publish it?
No, I mean, I guess I see your point there, but I don't see why you can't be open to, why you can't see my point about, if these atoms and these electrons are in a wave-like state, and when, seeing the double-slit experiment, when the electrons are shot to the two slits, then it appears on the other side in a wave-like form.
I'm not saying that I'm not open to it. I'm just saying if you're going to postulate that there's an ultimate observer, you'd have to come up with another experiment to actually demonstrate that, what would it mean if there's an ultimate observer? What would we observe if there was? What would we observe if there wasn't? And how can we tell the difference? But also,
aren't there are physicists who are theistic.
There are plenty, yeah.
Are they writing about this and saying that this is what it implies?
They're not.
Okay, then I don't understand.
Maybe someone will hear this and hopefully...
Maybe you'll change physics.
Well, the LHC...
You're trying to change the laws of physics?
I just think that the more that the science tries to look into the quantum realm and dark matter and dark energy, then they realize that we really don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, but pseudoscientists and pushers of quackery love stuff that we don't quite understand yet because they can jump in on that and say, oh, well, that's just where God is.
Yeah, and I have to note that even though there are a number of people involved in the sciences who are religious, who are theistic, I guess I should say, when you start getting into the physical sciences, you start getting lower and lower numbers of people who see evidence of theism in the world enough to make them theistic. So it would seem that physics would be the least place to look if you're looking for evidence of God, because the people who are most informed and most involved in research in physics are least likely to be theistic.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. How come you've never had any, or there's been nobody else that's brought up this point? I think it's an interesting point.
I'm not saying there hasn't been anybody else who brought up this point. It's just that it hasn't... they haven't come up with a decent experiment to demonstrate it. I mean, you can make up whatever thing you like. I mean, people come up with all kinds of things like reincarnation is real, or if you paint little happy faces all over your body, then you'll feel better. But
it just seems though like the thing to do would be to find somebody that understands this research in like the person who is most informed that you can get your hands on, even if it's like a local university professor or a local university physics group or something, and put this to them and ask them if they feel like this is an implication of that experiment.
Right, because ultimately we're just a couple of people on TV without physics degrees who are batting around ideas with another guy who doesn't have a physics degree about what physics means. So
that's true.
Go to the source.
Well, would you guys ask some physicists that you know?
You can actually check a local university website, and they will have
let you go. We're out
link.
Of time, but thanks for calling. Go on.
I was going to say they'll have a link for contact information for their departments, and you can probably contact somebody in the physics department and see if you can get a reference there for someone that might be willing to answer your question.
All right, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice non-sectarian holiday and a happy
Whatever
New
you do
Year
or don't celebrate, have a good one.
Bye.